A lot of markets in IT are dominated by just a few firms. Sometimes people refer to such situations as monopolies. It's a useful shorthand, but legally it's not that clear that those firms truly operate monopolies. It's technically more correct to talk about market power. Economists define market power as the ability of a firm to exercise control over market outcomes, often by influencing price and quality, without immediate fear of competitive reprisal. And this can also affect security. Let's first start by exploring how concentrations of market power arise. 4 key factors contribute to this, which we will tackle one by one. Zero cost, positive network externalities, winner takes all, and first to market. The first factor is the fact that the marginal cost of information goods or services is close to zero. Now, building the first version of a product like iOS or a service like Amazon Elastic Compute Cloud is very expensive, so there are high fixed costs to enter the market. But the marginal cost, the cost of adding an additional user, is nearly zero. This is because information can be duplicated and distributed for almost nothing. And therefore, the company reaches economies of scale. The average cost per user, which is the fixed cost plus the marginal cost, decreases rapidly with more users. And this advantage causes a strong tendency towards market concentration. The second factor contributing to the rise of market power are positive network externalities. This is when the value of a product or service increases as more people use it. Consider Facebook. Its value to any given user increases as more of their friends join the network. In other words, there are external benefits to others from a user joining. The more users or customers a network gets, the more attractive it becomes to additional users. And this feedback loop can allow the network to pull away from competitors in terms of size. Many of these networks have 2 distinct user groups that provide each other with network benefits. And this is why they're often referred to as two-sided networks or markets. Think of advertising-supported platforms like Google and Facebook. And these platforms, there are 2 distinct groups: the users who consume content and in turn generate data, and the advertisers who want to reach those users. The users benefit from free or reduced cost services like searching on Google or connecting with friends on Facebook. And the advertisers benefit from the ability to reach a large and often well-targeted audience. Other examples are e-commerce marketplaces like eBay and Amazon, bringing sellers and buyers together. And software platforms like Windows and iOS, bringing app developers and users together. The pricing strategies of these platforms often involve subsidizing one side, like the users on Facebook or the buyers on Amazon, while charging the other side, like advertisers on Facebook or sellers on Amazon. In many digital markets, due to the network effects and economies of scale, benefits accrue disproportionately to the market leader. And this creates a winner-takes-all dynamic. Google's dominance in search or Amazon's dominance in e-commerce are good examples. And even big tech firms with deep pockets can be defeated by these forces. Microsoft tried to position Windows Phone as a third option in a market that was dominated already by Google's Android and Apple's iOS. But it failed. And a key factor of the failure was that Microsoft did not attract enough developers to provide apps for the two-sided platform. The developers wouldn't come because there were not enough users. And the users were not joining because there were not enough apps. And after a few years, Microsoft gave up. Because of these accruing benefits, it's very important to be the first to market. It's perhaps more precise to say that it's important to be the first that gets a critical mass of users. Before companies like Uber and Booking and Airbnb, there were other firms offering similar services. And there still are. But once these 3 companies managed to reach critical mass, they quickly captured the dominant market share and made it very difficult for competitors of a similar size to emerge. Now, how does market concentration affect cybersecurity? There are a couple of mechanisms. First, Given that market dynamics prioritize early entry, rapid growth, and feature development, this conflicts with the need for security, both in terms of allocation of resources, as well as the pressure to avoid time-consuming testing and development processes. We can see yet another instance of this dynamic in the recent rush of big tech firms to roll out large language models like ChatGPT, even though the security and privacy controls in those models are severely lacking. Each firm is worried that one of the competitors will capture the market. Second, it's often critical for platforms to appeal to complementers, such as operating system vendors needing to appeal to app developers. If they fail, well, remember the example of Windows Phone. And this means that the platform has a lot of incentives to put as few barriers as possible in the way for those complementers. And few barriers means fewer security checks or controls. Think of Windows setting up users as admins by default, so that apps could run with very few restrictions or user prompts for escalation. Another example is the fact that users of iOS and Android could not set app permission until years after iOS and Android had already captured the market. This dynamic makes it easier for the bad guys, or in fact any complementer with questionable security practices, to join and abuse the network. Remember the Cambridge Analytica scandal on Facebook, where that firm could place an app onto the platform that harvested lots of user data because Facebook did not impose strict access controls, and that data was used for political campaigns. These network incentives are also at play around harmful content. In the case of the advertisement-driven platforms, they have optimized their algorithms for user engagement, since that is what appeals to the advertisers. And these resulting algorithms turn out to incite addictive behavior and reward content that promotes radicalization and extremism. Once that is noticed, some political actors adapt their strategy to this incentive structure. Once firms are dominant, they often face less competition because of the advantages that we discussed earlier, which are reinforced by customer lock-in and substantial switching costs. Lock-in refers to the strategic technique used by companies to make it costly or inconvenient for customers to switch to a competitor. The higher the cost, whether these are financial, time, or otherwise, the more locked in a customer is. Switching costs can take a variety of forms, such as the cost of having to learn a new product, or contractual obligations, or the difficulty of migrating very rich data sets from one operational environment to another, or the opportunity cost of the time spent on migrating to another service. In terms of security, less competition can lead to complacency. After all, why invest heavily in security when customers have few alternatives and switching is difficult? However, we are also seeing a shift in this dynamic. As compliance with privacy and security regulations become more important to organizations, dominant firms may provide this compliance with those standards as a competitive advantage. Notably, this raises the entry barriers for competitors even higher. And in this slide, it makes sense that a company like Facebook actively asked for regulation of social media back in 2019. Also, once firms are dominant, they might deploy security measures to lock in their customers. To give you one example, Apple uses security mechanisms to block cheap replacement parts and hamper third-party repair of their iPhones. What responses are available to mitigate market power and its impacts on security? One obvious area is antitrust regulation. Competition could drive security improvements, though it could also undermine it, since firms might feel pressured to prioritize other areas. Another option is to introduce mandatory security standards for firms with market power. This is what the European Union is doing with legislation like the Digital Services Act. This legislation also contains provisions for a third option, increasing transparency through reporting requirements. And finally, NGOs and governments have been entering into public-private partnerships with dominant firms, for example in the fight against child sexual abuse material, misinformation, and hate speech. These might become an arena for very complex tussles, and we discuss policy conflicts of that nature at the end